Good evening, everyone. I hope there are enough chairs, but it's great to see that we're scrounging around to try to find more chairs for people coming. This is a wonderful turnout. At the Council on World Affairs here, obviously, our mission is to try to put in front of you thoughtful, knowledgeable speakers to help you follow events, learn events, prepare you for what events that are coming in international affairs. And we're especially fortunate to have with us tonight, and I'll get to his bio in a little bit, Ambassador James Jeffrey, who is currently the chair of the Middle East programs at the Woodrow Wilson Think Tank Center in Washington, D.C., a former colleague, friend, mentor of mine. He was my boss in Ankara, Turkey, as well, and it's been a great privilege for me to serve with him. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping first about our sponsors tonight and our upcoming programs. These sponsors share that passion or that sense of mission that we have to bring you information and analyses and to have you share your thoughts with them in international affairs. By the way, we have students here tonight from the high school. Ambassador Jeffrey spoke to a group of students at Savannah State University earlier today. Tomorrow he will speak to students and faculty at Georgia Southern University before he goes back to Washington. So we're very appreciative that we can do that kind of outreach as well. We couldn't do this, obviously, without our sponsors, the platinum sponsor of which, as you've heard many times before, is Kreitz, and I offer my condolences to the Kreitz family on the passing of Dale. But the Kreitz Group has served the Savannah and Coastal Empire for over 80 years, the local dealer for Buick, GMC, BMW, Mercedes, and Sprinter vans, specializing in new and used and certified pre-owned vehicles. So we're very happy, not just to have these sponsors, but the consistency of our sponsors. Also, a silver sponsor for tonight's event, United Community Bank, that's been here for 70 years working with you on your financial and personal interests, and good for in every department at every location that they have in the region. So we're very pleased that we have United, which can help you reach your financial goals. And our third sponsor in kind is Cathedral Productions. As you see, a creatively inspired video company. Works from the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist here in Savannah, doing weddings, christenings, and you see their personal guarantee to help you celebrate your events with memories for generations to come. So thank you very, very much for our three sponsors. I want to make one other announcement, well, really two other announcements on the activities of the Council, which some of you may be familiar with this from the past. I first came across the Great Decisions lecture series on international issues when I was a graduate student at Duke in North Carolina several decades ago. And it's a great program run around the country where people study issues. They're given information, study, and come and have a usually very, very lively conversation and informed conversation on the issues of the day. So I wanted to remind you of all that we made the announcement before, but I'm elaborating on it. We at the Council will be sponsoring 3 of these Great Decisions programs next year, 2024, 2 on Skidaway in February and March, and 1 jointly with the Learning Center downtown, I'm sure many of you know it, in April and May. We need you to indicate your interest by this weekend. It's just a plan for planning purposes. It's an involved process because we have to order books, the books that you would study to participate in the discussion. The Skidaway programs are nearly full, so we ask if you could act quickly. And if you do that, I'll tell you exactly how you can do it here tonight. But in a nutshell, what the participants will do, will meet in a group not to exceed 15 people for 90 minutes on 8 successive weeks to discuss the 8 topics selected by the Foreign Policy Association. It uses book articles, and there's a video prepared for each topic, all very high quality stuff. And it's all produced by the Foreign Policy Association. And I'm told that, of course, I'm still relatively new here in Savannah, but I'm told that these have been very popular programs in Savannah and on Skidaway in the past. We didn't run them, obviously, during the pandemic, but we're very happy to be able to get back to them. So if you have any questions tonight, and some of you may have received a hard copy, actually a handout, or they're at the desk there, pick up a fact sheet at the desk before leaving tonight, or speak with either Chip O'Brien or Jennifer Dwyer after the program. Let me just mention our two upcoming topics. On November 16th, one of our own board members will be Dr. Susan Theriault will be speaking on an extremely important topic, which when we did a little survey of subjects that you were interested in, migration and immigration was right up there. So she will be speaking on international migration and the challenges of seeking asylum in the United States. And we're very, very much looking forward to having Dr. Theriault present that on November 16th. And then on December 7th, you see there the title, A Blueprint for the Future of U.S. Diplomacy by Ambassador Ron Newman, who has been very involved in something called the American Academy of Diplomacy, which is a group of retired ambassadors and other high-ranking U.S. government officials. This is what he's going to present to you is a study about how we can improve our diplomacy, how we can improve U.S. diplomacy, how we organize ourselves, how we train people, and the importance, obviously, of diplomacy. And if you haven't, I teach a mini-master course up at Georgia Tech, the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, and the first thing I said to my students last semester was, you have an unusual opportunity, be a sponge, because at that time I was talking about the Ukraine conflict. You want to see how foreign affairs are run, how you build alliances, how people fight wars, how you do sanctions, all different kinds of things. You will learn a heck of a lot. Well, now, of course, unfortunately, with the Israel-Hamas conflict, we have yet other lessons to learn from, but there's much to absorb and to learn. But one of the first things is you may have seen President Biden in Israel, and I think Ambassador Jeffrey will speak to this. But before President Biden went there, you had almost a permanent deployment of our Secretary of State to the region, not just to Israel, but throughout the Gulf, in Jordan, in Egypt, and everywhere else. And that's partly what your taxpayer dollars go to. And the intent of that is to prevent escalation of hostilities, prevent civilian deaths, help deal now, especially, with the humanitarian situation. And I'm very pleased to tell you that somebody that many of you came here to listen to, right in this room, Ambassador David Satterfield, was picked by the President and the Secretary of State to be the special envoy to handle Middle East humanitarian operations. So he is involved. He left his post at the head of the James A. Baker Public Policy Institute at Rice University and has gone back to work in the region for this very important mission to help hopefully cut through any political problems and any bureaucratic problems and get humanitarian assistance to where it's needed. Now for our presentation tonight, which you've heard about, entitled "The New World Disorder," and I think it'll be a real treat for you to have today's events not just explained and discussed with you, because he wants to hear from you as well, but also put into very important historical context. I mentioned what Ambassador Jeffrey is doing now, but he had first a career in the U.S. Army, and we're very thankful for his service as an infantry officer. Then he has been our ambassador to Turkey, to Iraq, and to Albania. He has been the Deputy National Security Advisor to the President. He has been the Special Representative for Syria engagement and a Special Envoy, and I can't tell you how complex and multifaceted this job was, and it was a success. It was a real success of U.S. foreign policy and efforts, which was the global coalition to defeat ISIS. For that alone, I think the country owes him a great debt. He's been a great friend and a mentor to me. So it's my great pleasure to welcome, to speak to you tonight, Ambassador James Jeffrey.
That was a bit too kind. I could give the same or a similar CV to Larry, who you're all lucky enough to have. But first of all, tonight I'd like to thank not only Larry, but also the Savannah Council for inviting me down here. This is what we do in the Wilson Center, or at least it's part of our work. We also do research and academic work and work with media and such, but we're very proud of what we do with the American people. I'm also glad that you all showed up tonight, because there's nothing more discouraging than a half-filled hall. And now, it's also very important that you are here and doing what you're doing. We are a democracy. At the end of the day, what President Biden does, and Larry and I both worked for him when he was vice president, and we've worked with presidents, what they do is dependent upon the feedback they get from the American people. The better the feedback, the better their decisions, and your feedback requires you to pay attention. So the fact that you are in this organization, the fact that you're here tonight, is really encouraging to all of us as American citizens. That's the first thing. Second thing is, what I want to do tonight is to talk a little bit about the world disorder we're facing today, mainly by talking about the world order, because you can't have disorder if you didn't have a world order that was being disordered. And I'll get to that and stick in Gaza and Ukraine and throw in Taiwan. And then I'll give you a few predictions on where this is likely to turn out. Because this is a very special time, and I've been through a lot. My first crisis, some of you may be old enough. Where was that Navy veteran Bob? Yeah, who remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was existential for all of us who were around at the time. But we've been through many other crises, many of which from the Yom Kippur War, where I was put on alert to go to Israel, to Vietnam, that I've been involved in the Balkans and Iraq and Syria and a lot of other things. But what we're in right now is very special. And I want to take you back a long time before any of us were around, or anybody perhaps but Bob. And that is 1945. We emerged then, the world, from a 30-year period of war and preparation for war, 1914 to 1945, that killed over 100 million people directly, led to the first use of nuclear weapons, and it covered the whole world. And there was a belief everywhere that we can never do this again. This led to several things. First of all, there was an effort to set up an international order, similar to what Woodrow Wilson had tried with the League of Nations after World War I, and it failed. And that was the UN, but for reasons I won't get into, the UN also has not been all that successful. Many of their organizations, and you can see them in Gaza right now, do great work under terrible conditions, bringing services from education to medical care to refugee treatment and that kind of thing. And you have the Security Council, which sometimes functions, sometimes doesn't, but that's not really the world order. The world order, while it uses elements of the UN, is an amorphous collection of concentric circles set up by the United States, Britain, and other countries after World War II. At the center, and this is very important because it's all about you, is American power. And that's hard power, economic, military, and diplomatic. Your alliance system, who your friends are. And that is the core of the whole system, so the 3% of your taxes that go to defense, believe me, are well spent. One level around that is what we call collective security. That is the idea of one for all and all for one. We don't want to have 20% of our national economic product go to the military like it did in World War II. But we also want a peaceful world, so the solution is we do it with a whole group of allies and partners who contribute to the collective security of everyone. And that means that if something goes wrong in one place, we all come in, like we did not just America, but 30 other nations in 1991 to liberate Kuwait, or 15 nations to go to the defense of Korea in 1950, or the 80 nations we had fighting the Islamic State terrorists from 2014 to 2018. It's a very, very good concept. It has problems which we can get into. I should have said, My main goal this evening is to open this up to questions after I get through this general summary and a prediction on where things are going, and then we can get to the questions, because you all know most of this stuff. This is just a reminder. And the third level is all these international institutions, free trade, the use of the dollar as an international currency, and on and on and on, which, you know, there's not somebody sitting in a back room in the White House who controls all this stuff. There's not even any group of nations. It's a very variable geometry of nations and international institutions, the World Bank and such, but they all kind of work together. And they've provided this international order that was such that even when it was challenged in the Cold War, from 1948 to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, everybody, even though they were trying to replace it, sort of had to work with it. And most importantly, work with the basic principle of it, which was major states don't attack other states. They don't try to destroy countries and peoples. Because that's how World War II started. Germany, Italy, and Japan started off small, attacking places you can hardly find on a map today. There's no Sudetenland today. There's no Abyssinia, actually it's now Ethiopia, and there's no Manchukuo in northern China. And nobody really cared very much, not the American and British and French publics, and so they got away with it. And then one day, those same Japanese from Manchukuo were dropping bombs on our fleet in Pearl Harbor, and the German Luftwaffe was bombing London. And that was the lesson we all learned, and we're still applying today. Now, I have had 1,000 arguments with people about it. There was a whole school in the 1960s on the margins of the Vietnam debate, that revisionist school that said, no, your thinking is all wrong. It isn't always Munich, 1938. Well, I think we're getting a lesson these days that if you're not careful, it is, because that's my point tonight. This is different. This is like Munich in 1938. What Russia did in Ukraine, invading a neighboring state, we haven't seen a major power that can affect the global sense of security do something like that. We have seen country X attack country Y. We've seen a fair amount of that, although much less than before 1945, but it hasn't rippled through the whole system like a Russian attack. And we see China indicating that it might do that to Taiwan. Now, I could talk about the backstory, diplomatic and historic, on Taiwan, on Gaza and Israel and the Palestinians, or on Ukraine all night. Again, many of you know it, and it's not as important as understanding that lines have been crossed that we haven't seen crossed since the 1930s. In Ukraine, in Gaza, that attack was designed directly, not just to kill a lot of Israelis and deliver a military defeat, unlike the Yom Kippur War in 1973, when Egypt and Syria all but defeated Israel. That was part of a set of steps, coordinated at least loosely with Iran and some of Iran's partners, to destroy the state of Israel. And whether you like the state of Israel or not, it's a legitimate state recognized by everybody in the world and actually established by the UN. It doesn't deserve to die. So, what are we doing about this? Well, the collective security system requires the U.S. to take the lead. And you have seen in the last 2 weeks as good an example of a president taking the lead dramatically, surprising everybody, including me, and I know these guys, including the trip to Israel. That doesn't surprise me, because when I was ambassador to Iraq, Biden would always show up, and then we would be shelled. And then I would have to explain to him in the Secret Service not to take it personally. And but the trip was really not so much in terms of physical risk, although there was some. It was the diplomatic. As you saw, the Arab states canceled because of the attack that turned out to be a terrorist attack, not an Israeli attack, on the hospital in Gaza. And that's the kind of lumps you take if you're going to lead dramatically, and he's doing it, and he got a lot of points with the Israelis, but he also got a lot of points in the Arab world. Even though their people are out on the streets protesting, they're watching what he's doing. And what he's doing is, we were talking about, our defense budget is weak and all of that, and we're pivoting to Asia. And suddenly we've come up with 3 aircraft carriers. 2 official ones, and the Marine amphibious group actually has what anybody else would call an aircraft carrier with them. And meanwhile, they're out in the Red Sea shooting down missiles tonight, or at least earlier today. So, aimed at Israel. So he has basically joined Israel, not in the fight in Gaza, that'll be Israel's fight, but to ensure that nobody intervenes in this fight and makes Israel's job harder. And everybody in the Middle East, everybody in the world is watching. The Chinese are watching. I used to say the fate of Taiwan will be settled by what happens with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I still hold to that. So I'll say, what happens in Ukraine is going to be based largely on how this whole thing in Gaza and America's response to it turns out. And that's the stakes we have today. Basically, the whole international order since 1945, that major states don't just do what Hitler and the Japanese and the Italians did and invade their neighbors, has been torn up. And the United States is trying to avoid the mistake of the US and Britain and France by ignoring that until it was too late and we were fighting for our existence. So that's where we are. Now, where's this going to come out? I'll do Gaza and Ukraine. The Israelis are going to go in on a military offensive, a huge one, as soon as they can clear most of the civilians from the northern third of Gaza, because that's where most of the Hamas forces are. It's probably where the hostages are. It's where the tunnel systems are. They will suffer terrific losses, but they will put, if they have to, 100,000 troops in, and they will, with technology and manpower and woman power, because the Israelis have a lot of women in the army, they will defeat Hamas if given enough time. That's going to be messy, because even though most civilians have left, there'll still be civilian casualties, and there'll be pressure to stop. The point is, this is not the Israelis trying to get revenge. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Israelis want revenge, and I could understand that, just like we wanted revenge after Pearl Harbor. And what did we do after Pearl Harbor? The first thing almost we did. Anybody know? Okay, has anybody ever heard the name of General Doolittle? Yeah. What did he do?
Bombed Tokyo.
Yeah, he bombed Tokyo. He didn't do that out of revenge, although it was pretty sweet. And it wasn't to improve the morale of the American population, although it certainly did. He did that to show them that we were coming, and they better start thinking about how they're going to defend against us, which had a morale impact on them. They didn't know where we would come from next. If we could bomb Tokyo a couple of months after Pearl Harbor, what could we come up with? Kind of like coming up with, like magic, boom, 3 aircraft carriers. This is what we do. So we will deter anybody else, Iran and Iran surrogates, such as the Houthis and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Houthis are in Yemen. All of these H organizations, Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, Lebanon, who else? The Hazara in Afghanistan. They're all out of the Hamas Shia, and they're all allied with Iran, and they're all on the wrong side of history. So there'll be some firing of rockets and such. I don't think that they will dare intervene, because we can defeat them. And we won't defeat them with hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground. We're not going to try to transform countries. We're just going to shoot down their rockets and bomb their troops if they advance across the Israeli border, period. And we can do that. And the Israelis will then fight this terrible battle. Their goal is, as I said, not revenge, but to destroy Hamas's military capability. They actually did that with Hezbollah in 2006, when they went into Lebanon after Hezbollah attacked across the border. And Hezbollah hasn't attacked them in 17 years, because Hezbollah knows how lethal an Israeli invasion can be. The Israelis are going to teach this lesson to Hamas. They'll try to dismantle their military organization, kill or capture their leaders, destroy much of their equipment, crush the tunnel system. But again, and we saw this with the Islamic State, they had 35,000 troops, they had 9 million people in Iraq and Syria under their control, and a $1 billion budget. And we, over 4 years, with this huge coalition, but mainly Syrian and Iraqi soldiers on the ground, destroyed them as a state. They're still out there as cells. and you'll have the same thing with Hamas. You can never eliminate these guys. They're an ideological movement, and they blend into the population. But they won't be the same kind of military threat to Israel, and that's critical because that's what Israel, to its surprise, found themselves facing. And they're already facing a similar but bigger threat from Iran and Hezbollah. They couldn't afford a third. They have to take these guys out. How will it end specifically? You've got the issue of the hostages. My most likely scenario, and all of these scenarios are kind of hard to figure out because things change, would be at some point the Israelis will trade leaving Gaza for the return of the hostages. I don't think this time they will empty their prisons of thousands of Hamas terrorists in order to get their people back. I just don't think they'll do that, but I could be wrong. They've done it before. But I think this time they see that as too big a risk to the entire state and people of Israel. There'll be a lot of international pressure because, as I said, there'll still be civilian deaths. Nobody's going to care about Hamas deaths, but there will be civilian deaths. But we, in the form of President Biden, extremely dramatically, very decisively, you saw how quickly he decided it wasn't Israel, it was the Islamic Jihad, another terrorist group allied with Hamas in Gaza that had fired a rocket that misfired and went into the hospital the other day. Presidents normally don't shoot from the hip like that. They don't normally say things until they're absolutely sure because they are the President of the United States. But he knew under the circumstances he had to get that word out. He got the word out, and luckily the evidence seems to be proving him correct. But presidents, when they're doing this kind of thing, it's so unusual, it gets your attention, believe me. And it's the right thing to do when you're in a really dramatic situation, as we are with Ukraine and now Gaza. So I think the Israelis will prevail. I think they will restore deterrence. I think we will have a huge political mess with Gaza. And as the president said, he doesn't want the Israelis occupying Gaza. We can't sustain that politically with all of our Arab allies. So everybody will have to spend a lot of time and effort trying to put together Humpty Dumpty in Gaza, and that won't be easy. And we still have the Palestinian Israeli larger problem that's been going on since 1948, and that needs at least to be stabilized because it hasn't been stabilized for a number of years. And there's the larger rapprochement, the moving together of Israel and most Arab states, which was going along. And one of the reasons Hamas, and to the extent they were directly involved in Iran, did this attack was to derail that effort to try to bring the countries of the region together. Because this is a weird region, folks. I hope nobody's from the region. I don't want to insult the wonderful people there. I've spent much of my life, as says Larry, with them. But I also know what's going on in South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, Europe. You have conflicts there. The former Yugoslavia with Bosnia and Kosovo. You had some fighting 50 years ago in Central and South America. You had Burma, Myanmar now, an internal conflict, and in Sri Lanka, the Tamil. But ever since Vietnam, no big fighting in East Asia. We worry about China, we worry about North Korea, but it's different from, think back of watching every 6 months somebody going to something like a war in the Middle East, because that's the experience, and it's been the experience of Larry and me, because we keep on getting sent to these things ever since the 1980s. So the region really needs the kind of efforts that the Israelis, Washington, and the Arabs are doing to try to stabilize it, and we hope that that can be put back on track. If Gaza is a success, the Russians will think twice about wearing out the West on Ukraine. The Ukraine right now is a frozen conflict at a very high level of casualties and a very high level of cost, both to us and the Russians, but I see neither side gaining a major military advantage. So at some point, but we're not quite at that point, there'll be an effort to try to get a negotiated settlement. If the United States, and remember, we have friends in Europe, we have friends around the world, are able to stabilize Gaza and stabilize Ukraine, China is not going to act on Taiwan. China is seeing what the American Navy is doing right now. Your Navy, everybody, your Navy that you pay for, your Navy that your children, girls and boys, are on. That's what they're doing tonight. And it's very important for the future of the whole country. Okay, I'll stop there and I'll open up for questions.
Can I just remind everyone?
Okay, let me turn this down.
Remind everyone, please try to keep your questions brief. Chip O'Brien will come around with a microphone. Please raise your hand. We'll identify you. Chip will come with the microphone, and please keep the question short. Thank you. Right here in front.
Allegedly, the leading leaders of Hamas are hiding out in Qatar. Is it appropriate, or would it be possible that as one of the first moves into Gaza by the Israelis would be to take these people out, and what would be U.S. policy behind that?
It's not allegedly, they are. The current leader, Haniyeh, and Mashal, the predecessor, are both there as guests of the Qatari government. And our biggest air base, and the one that we can use most freely in the Middle East, is in Qatar. And our main channel to get hostages, including the American hostages, out of Gaza is Qatar. Life is complicated. The Israelis could try to take this guy out. They actually sent a team into Jordan a few years ago. Larry would know. He's my expert on the Middle East. I'm not really a Middle East expert. To try to poison Mashal, the then Hamas leader. And they poisoned him, but the Israeli team was caught, and the Jordanians put pressure on the Israeli government to send the antidote if they wanted their hit team back. And so, look, it's a complicated region. I don't think they're going to go after these guys because they could have done that already.
Next question down in front here. Hold on, Mike. We'll just wait for the microphone for a second.
I don't need a microphone.
No, the reason the mic is the reason the mic isn't for me. It's for the people way back in the hall.
So, the big question: how do we prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons?
The president has said, essentially, if they're at the cusp of nuclear weapons, he will do whatever it takes to stop them. Other presidents have said that, not quite as convincingly as Biden. And however much Biden really wondered whether he would do that or not 2 weeks ago, he's a lot closer to doing that tonight. I think we will.
Over there.
And I think they know that, but that's the thing. The whole idea behind deterrence, people, is if they think all military analysis is based upon two things. Your capabilities, how much military might you have, how good you are at using it, and your will, your intentions. Will you use it? The Iranians know that we, particularly we and the Israelis, could, even without using nuclear weapons, destroy their nuclear program and a lot else. But they're not sure we have the will to do it because they have ways to retaliate. It won't destroy us or Israel, but it would cause a whole lot of concern and probably cut off all of the oil coming out of the Middle East. And that means $10 a gallon here in Savannah. So, just like I said earlier, you're responsible and you ultimately to take the decisions or help the president take the decisions. You also bear the pain of those decisions. As nobody's around anymore, a lot of parents learned during World War II, like about 1 million parents.
Thank you, sir. Where does Turkey stand in this world order and the conflicts that are going on right now?
Turkey is, well, you've got Turkey as a state that kind of acts just like Israel or the United States, acts within certain boundaries determined by where the people are, where the interests are in the history and commitments. It's, foreign policy is like a huge ocean tanker, keeping with the oil analogy. It's very hard to turn it. And then you've got where the leaders are. Bibi Netanyahu is a very different leader than the guy who was before him briefly. And that has consequences. Erdogan is volatile. He's very hard to predict. He lives up to any commitment he makes, but it's very hard to get him to make commitments. And he always goes to the fine print. We're seeing this now with getting Sweden into NATO. He'll do it eventually, but he'll go back and tell you, look at the fine print when he said he would. And sure enough, there'll be fine print saying that certain things have to happen. And if they don't happen, he won't act. He doesn't do anything so that people will think he's a nice guy. It's a largely Islamic country. Therefore, they're very sensitive to non-Muslims killing Muslims. And so you've got a lot of street protest. Erdogan has got a long-term relationship like Qatar with Hamas. But on the other hand, he has a quasi-alliance with Israel against Iran in a broad arc, as you would be looking at the map, from western Syria through northern Iraq to the Caucasus and Azerbaijan. So it's and that's much more important. Israel is not a threat to Erdogan's Turkey. Iran is, and therefore he's being careful up to now, but knowing him, you got to watch him every day. Now, the country as a whole is, I won't say firmly or it's deeply, if not firmly anchored in the West. Most Turks do not feel themselves part of the Middle East, even though they're Muslim. Their orientation is towards Europe. They're in NATO, they're in the Council of Europe, they're a candidate state for the European Union, they have a customs union with the European Union. You know, they have tremendous investments in Europe. So economically, kind of culturally, militarily, they're part of Europe. But they're a difficult actor, in part because of Erdogan, in part because of their past, and in part because, like France, we find that powerful countries with a glorious past don't like getting orders from Larry and me. Because that's what Larry Meehan did. If you want to say, well, what was your day like? It was going into foreign ministries or presidencies and telling them, you got to do this. Washington would like. Or if the messages from Washington were particularly obnoxious, we know what your people want, so please do X, which tended to be what we wanted as opposed to what people want. I mean, we can be pretty arrogant, believe me, all for a good cause. Okay. Questions?
We have one in the front here.
Hi, yes.
Go ahead. You're on. You're okay.
Okay. Thank you. Turning to after the Israeli-Gaza war is over, what do you think the United States could do or would do if China, and perhaps in cooperation with Russia, sought to extend their influence in the Middle East by offering to go in and rebuild Gaza?
Wow. That would be interesting, but it would be so out of character for these guys. The Chinese, you may have heard of the Belt and Road and the $1 trillion. Well, the Belt and Road, I don't want to make fun of it because, I mean, they put a lot more money into infrastructure than we have, ports in particular, and transportation and electricity. But it's done, unlike the assistance in this international order I talked about from World War II, with not just us and the Europeans and the UN, but the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other things. You know, we give loans, and then we forgive the loans, and we talk to the local people about what they want. The Chinese come in, and it's all debt that these countries incur and are expected to repay, and it's designed to strengthen the Chinese web of ports, transportation links, railways, airports, and potentially, ultimately, military bases. So they're not really great friends of building things up. And the Russians just don't bother. I mean, they could start with Syria that they blew apart from 2015 to 2018. And that's a much bigger country with there's 12 million people left in the government areas. Half the population has fled. I mean, this is like 20 times Gaza. So why is Gaza getting all this attention in the Arab world when 12 million Arabs had to flee the Assad regime just next door and 650,000 were killed, some of them by chemical weapons? Because it's not how many people are killed or how terribly they're killed, it's who kills them. And Israel killing Arabs generates feelings, psychological feelings, identity feelings in the Arab world, in the Middle East, that not just other Arabs like Assad killing them, or even Russians killing them. It isn't anti-Semitic, that's wrong. It's anti-colonial, because they feel the same way about us. It is a deeply held belief throughout the whole global South. But normally it's not a problem because the rest of the global South doesn't see much violence. But in the Middle East, where it sees more than its share of violence, if that violence comes from former colonializers, and fairly or not, the Israelis have been put in that category, it stirs this huge ideological reaction that Russia, that was never seen as a colonializer, doesn't generate. It's just unfair. But no, China and Russia aren't going to rebuild Gaza. They wouldn't know how to begin.
If I could just, what proves what Ambassador Jeffrey just said, I was involved in donor conference. The donor conferences for helping for the reconstruction of Syria, some of which were hosted by the Kuwaitis, and and I was involved. And we would put up roughly $500 million a year. The Kuwaitis, because they were hosting, said, okay, we match the Americans $500 million. There were a few of these conferences. At the first one, the Russian government pledged $2 million, and the next few, zero. So that will give you an idea.
Yeah, I was at one, Larry, in 2019. We in the EU and EU countries, that is our allies in Europe, together pledged over $3 billion for Syria. Russia went from 2 to 1 million, Larry. So it isn't that they didn't ante up, but it was a little below expectations.
They do have a base there still.
Pardon?
The Russians do have a base in Syria.
And so do we. And we have several of them, all of which were being shelled the other day, and we are being defended, and we're not going anywhere.
Here's the next one.
You've expressed some confidence about our aircraft carriers built up in the Eastern Mediterranean to prevent a full-scale second front from Lebanon with Hezbollah. Are you very confident? Because I am not, but I'd like to hear you elaborate a little more. And obviously with Iran calling the shot.
I'm more confident now than I was 6 hours ago because I saw what the USS, what was a Navy ship in the northern Red Sea, just did to a barrage of long-range missiles and drones fired at Israel. They shot them all down. What you've got is everybody focused on the aircraft carriers. It's the cruisers and destroyers. We have had plans, they're not secret, they're just not talked about much, including putting a TPY-2 phase radar in Israel, which we've done with American crews for over a decade, to provide naval ballistic missile defense systems to Israel. We base 4 destroyers in Rota. So that whole system and a lot more was just shoved forward. And the capacity of that force, those cruisers and destroyers, to shoot down incoming missiles is very dramatic. Doesn't mean they'll get them all, but they will get a lot of them, and it's a way to bring us into the war, because remember, there are 100,000 Americans in Israel at least, and as we saw 13 days ago, with 31 dead Americans are targets as well. And so we'll be defending Americans, and I think we'll do a good job. And if we have to, that's what you've got the carriers for. They have tremendous reach out and hit you capability. I do too.
So I guess if there had been a lot of Americans in Ukraine, that would have bettered their position too. But that was not my question. You said earlier that Russia is going to look closely at how we present, our strength in the Gaza. I'm wondering. I grew up in Germany, and I have some family there still, and they are all very worried that Putin might, that the war might come their way. And I just told my mother the other day, I don't think he would dare, because the moment he sets foot into one of the NATO countries, America would be there to just wipe him out. Am I correct, or are they correct to worry?
That's a very complex personal question, because ich habe 9 Jahre lang in Deutschland gelebt. Meine Frau ist gebürtige Deutsche, und ich habe vieles über Deutschland zu sagen. So, and beginning with, they ought to damn well worry. Not because we won't protect them, we will, but they need to do more. Remember I told you about the deal, all for one, one for all? The biggest non-performer in this whole thing, I'm sorry, is Germany. They had a wonderful army during the Cold War, and they continued on. My son, who's a dual national, was a German paratrooper. Those are really good units. It has fallen apart, as if you watch any German TV, ZDF ARD, any evening, they recount it. And they're supposed to do what they call a Zeitenwende, a dramatic change in our whole outlook on life, and spend 100 billion euros, which is like $120 million, on the military. And they're having a hard time finding, where do we put that money? Where's drawer 7? Who has the key to drawer 7? I mean, honestly, you must follow German, through your family and such. And they're having a very hard time adjusting to it. The Germans believed not only that they were living in the world of peace, as I call it, but that there was no other alternative. It would always be the world of peace, because who wouldn't want peace more than war? And they discovered that Putin likes war rather than peace, Iran likes war rather than peace, and Hamas likes war rather than peace, and you have to deal with it, and you deal with it by being dragged down into the muck of the world of war with them. That's the sad truth. In terms of more Americans, no, I think we're doing everything that we could for Ukraine. I wish we would move this equipment quicker. You know, we daddle over tanks, and then we send the tanks, and we daddle over long-range rockets, and we send them, and that's just encouraging Putin. And I honestly, and I know these guys all in the White House, I don't know why they're doing that, because they always decide in the end to do it after irritating our Ukrainian allies. But remember, I said, to the extent we can, we like to do this through local allies, so that we're not doing everything. They want to protect their country, and they're doing a good job, and we have to help them, and we will. And if we need to give them more help, we will. And they're not going to get to Germany. But it wouldn't be actually, Germany is giving more equipment to Ukraine than any other country but us. So that's good news. But unfortunately, with Germany, the good news stops there.
Okay. She just kind of took my question. But it seems to me that Putin can't get the smile off his face right now with all that's going on. And he's sliding up next to China as much as he can. What effect is that going to have, do you think, in the overall
flow of this?
Okay, I've had some contact with all these guys, including Putin. It's really hard to wipe the smile off his cynical, evil face. Okay, first of all, he's a trained spy, and he's going to project the face that he thinks will most make you nervous and pose questions just like that. It's a very good question. I'm not criticizing the question. I'm just saying Putin would be happy, and he's hoping there'll be Americans who are going to be saying that. Putin's had a really bad year and a half, folks. It's not just that his offensive fell apart. It's that much of his army fell apart. And then, having done this even bigger of his partnerships with China just before, he went to China and Xi, and they signed an unlimited cooperation. Well, talking about can't find, you know, the keys to safe number 23, where the 100 billion euros of German defense funding is, the Chinese haven't been able to find the keys yet to the weapons that they keep telling Putin they're trying to find. Well, look, we think they were down in Shanghai someplace, you know, maybe on a boat. Maybe the boat went to Australia. Well, let's check the boat. Putin's very unhappy. And so Putin, yeah, he was delighted to see what Hamas did. And now he's got 3 American aircraft carriers that he had no idea where the hell they came from, popping up, and they could come visit his neighborhood too. It's not that far away. And he's got Biden, the war president, you know, parading around, you know, Jerusalem just before the rockets come in again. And he's saying, I don't like this movie. Believe me, he doesn't. And it's our job to keep him unhappy.
James, you talked about the will of the people politically. You got 2024 right around the corner. Does anything change your mind as far as the direction, the way we would approach this? If you were to look at the different options on both sides politically, is the game plan the same, or does that change?
This is the biggest question in the world today, other than how serious climate change is. If Joe Biden gets reelected, assuming he's still around, no. If Donald Trump gets reelected, you have a variety of options. Having worked in the Trump administration, it was a lot of Sturm und Drang, to use another German word, and, you know, people were irritated at him, but he actually got along pretty well with most foreign leaders. And when he wasn't cozying up to Putin personally, he was doing all kinds of things Putin hated, like sanctioning Germany for purchasing gas, sending weapons to Ukraine, you know, trying to get side deals on dirt on Joe Biden, but that's how transactional Trump is, negotiating with the North Koreans, which actually was a pretty good idea, and doing the pivot to China, and taking tough action against Iran, including killing its top spy. So it was actually not, it was a chaotic in terms of execution and presentation, but being in the belly of the beast, actually doing things, it was okay. If you get him back with the kind of people he had in the first term, leaving aside the rule of law and the domestic situation, it could be okay. but it might not be. And the people he started bringing in at the very end, like we all know each other in Washington. He was bringing in people that are really scary. Because he either had competent people like General Mattis in defense or Mike Pompeo in state, who were both very competent and particularly Pompeo, knew how to not get on, basically figure out ways to persuade Trump to do things that needed to be done. The people that he may bring in are very competent, but in a very bad way. And so I don't know, I'm not here to tell you, about American politics, just to say, this is a factor in other people's assessment of what's going to happen. And do they feel lucky? It isn't just, will we get Trump? It's, will we get Trump who does it differently than he did last time? And that's a possibility. There's no chance that Joe Biden, at 80 years old, is going to do anything different than he's been doing in his whole career, okay? He's extremely predictable. And as I said, from my point of view in foreign policy, mainly in a good way. Trump can be okay in the end. I mean, he'll say outrageous things, but what he and his administration does, it may be okay. I mean, hey, we survived, the last 4 years in foreign policy. That's where, we still have that Navy, it didn't go away under him. And we still have these alliances, they didn't go away. But I also don't know, knowing the people around him and the fact that, like me, he's my age, he's getting older, and you forget things, you get angry at people. I mean, so far tonight I haven't got angry at anybody, but who knows what the next question will bring, okay? I would just say, I would advise Putin and Xi and all of the bad guys in the Middle East, don't count on this. A, he might not get elected. B, if he gets elected and acts like he did last time, it's going to be bad news bears for these guys also. So they better assume that regardless of who's president, they're in a world of hurt if they push us and our friends too far.
We had a question over here. Who had their hand up? Okay, go back over here. It was the lady with Amsterdam hat.
I was curious, with all your experience, what you would tell a brand new young diplomat just coming in to the State Department. What's the mission? How should they look at the broad picture as they start their career in diplomacy?
The basic thing is their mission is to serve the American people and carry out the policies of the American president. And that's really important because it gets to, I mean, you take an oath. You take an oath to the Constitution, but in practical terms, you take orders from the president through the Secretary of State. I talk a bit about the global order and say it's bigger than you, it's even bigger than the United States. You're preserving peace, prosperity, and political freedom, not just for us, but frankly for most of the world, which most of the world, at least behind doors, will admit. And the other thing is, two other things. First of all, develop real expertise in country or area X, including languages, culture, history. It's not because then that's all you do, because you might get plucked out of East Asia and put into South America. It's the learning and the understanding of how other people think that's so important, and that you can carry with you. You can apply it to other places, because the other thing, and this is kind of sensitive, and some of you who are not originally from the United States might sense it more than others, and that is, there's two kinds of people in the world, Americans and everybody else. Not that we're different in how we, our passions and our loves and our fears and our human, but we are all part of a country that is incredibly powerful and incredibly influential around the world in a way no other country is. The Germans, where's my German friend? The Germans, you may have heard this, but I've heard it a lot. Every American presidential election, you get these comments in the German media, we should vote because it's more important to us who's the American president than it is who's our chancellor. I won't comment about the current chancellor. I don't think that was true with Merkel or some of the others, but and that's really important to understand this, so you will control not even your arrogance, but the perception incorrect they may have of you of being arrogant. You have to realize that we have special power and special influence over others' lives that they don't have over ours. Because, and again, you were the best example. Her mother is worried, will the Americans come to save us from Putin? There are people like her mother all over the world. That's the truth. And you got to know that if you're an American representing your country and its commitments to these people. We're not, who do we worry about coming to rescue us from somebody? Nobody, because we can do it ourselves. That's really an important but very subtle thing to understand if you're going to be an American diplomat and represent the country. But good question.
Here's a question.
Thinking longer term, does a two-state solution become more likely or less likely?
I thought it was dead in 2000, but most of us, and Larry can speak to this from his standpoint, most of us have assumed somewhere along the line from 2000 on, when the final, probably reasonable, close to a solution was on the table with President Clinton, that since then it has really died. But it is a useful improbability for our diplomacy. The more important problem is whether there is and this is a problem largely for Israel, whether there will be an intact Palestinian entity in the West Bank in the face of constant and in this Israeli government growing settler activity. That changes everything in a very bad way. That is, you can live with everybody saying, well, yeah, we're working on getting back to the two-state solution without believing it, just like we've been working for 50 years on finding a solution to the division of Cyprus after the Turks went in 74 rather. But the reality is it's a useful fiction. And we do this, believe me, diplomacy is full of, like people say, it's a little unfair, being a diplomat is being sent abroad to lie for your country. That's a bit crude and cruel, but we are sent abroad to mouth all of these useful fictions, and I would say the two-state solution is one of them. Larry?
I just want to add one thing, not directly, indirectly related to the prospects for a two-state solution. Hamas certainly didn't help the Palestinian cause, on the contrary. There's also the talk about, as you know, we were involved in and are involved still, and I believe will be involved after some of this dust settles, in an effort to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And so one of the corollary to the two-state solution question is that effort dead now? And between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I would say no. I would say it may take a pause, for obvious reasons, but I think the interests of Israel and the interest of Saudi Arabia and the others in the Middle East is that same. A good relationship with Israel is in their long-term interest. Forget about the politics, even forget about this current conflict. I firmly believe that we can get back to that at some point. But Hamas wanted to damage that, I think, partly. Partly. It's not that, not the sole reason, obviously. But in the end, while it may delay things or make things more complicated, I think we can get back to that.
I think we have time for one last question. Sir, you had your hand up.
Thank you. It seems to me that the issues with Hamas and what's going on right now needs, what's going to happen when it's all done? In other words, how can we help or someone help the Palestinians govern themselves so that people like Hamas don't come in and run their country for them or run whatever you want to call it, territory or something like that. But to me, long term, we need to figure out how to get Palestinians to govern themselves and do it in a more effective manner. Yeah,
and they're already thinking about that. That's why President Biden told Netanyahu, don't stay on there. But that means if they're not going to stay on and govern the place, which they did from 1967 to 2005, who does? We don't want to give it back to Hamas. Now, people thinking about some of our adventures, including Iraq, say, look, don't go in until you come up with a solution, know how this ends before you go in. And that's world of peace thinking when you have the option whether to go in, because folks, I don't want to shock you, I don't think I'm going to shock you, we really didn't have to go into Iraq with 150,000 troops in 2003. We had other ways to deal with that. The Israelis are in the world of war, just like Zelensky in Ukraine. And the logic of the world of war is, it is important to be thinking about, having somebody in the back room, Buffy and Charlie and Wendy thinking about this and, coming up with plans and PowerPoints. But the most important thing is to win. Because if you don't win, you will have no say in what happens afterwards. And winning is an existential thing. So it's a little unfair. And I don't want to, look, we put a lot of effort into building a post-World War II world. It was, as I said earlier, built around the UN. Then we saw, this isn't going to work with the Soviet Union as our partner, so we came up with, very quickly, under Harry Truman and a famous fellow Foreign Service officer, George Kennan, with his containment theory, we came up with a whole new order. And then we applied it in Berlin, we applied it in Greece, we applied it in Korea, and then we built NATO, and bang, we had our new world order because we had no choice, we had to work quickly. So we were planning, even in World War II, people in Israel and people in the United States tonight are thinking about this, and they're talking to each other. They're talking to the Europeans, they're talking to the UN, they're talking to the Arabs. But it's very hard to get concrete until you know the outcome of the fighting. Just like it was hard to get concrete on what we would do with Germany until we were pretty sure we would be, winning and the Germans would be losing. Same thing with Japan. But it's a very good question.
On that note, they were all very, very good questions. Thank you very, very much. I imagine you might be able to buttonhole Ambassador Jeffrey briefly before he escapes.
Depends on how much liquor these people can produce, but
please join me in thanking Ambassador Jeffrey.
I understand we're in a church, so the liquor idea might not fly. Anyway.
Thank you all, and don't forget November 16th back here to hear from Dr. Susan Theriault on immigration.
Come on over. Come on over.